Well, good morning, all. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Mick, and as you can see, we're not doing our videoing inside at all. We're at the back of West Beach Community Church today, and if you haven't been with us for a while, we've been going through a series, and the series has been called, well, is called "So Much More to Life." ... And we've been filling that ... in with something. We've looked at so much more to life in social media, and so much more to life than owning your own home. But this week, we're talking about so much more to life than retirement. And if we think about our context, our world today, right, we actually find ourselves today in a culture that, in a sense, it seems like we are constantly preparing ourselves for that thing that we call retirement. Retirement is that thing which is actually spoken about as that sort of anticipated time of what we think is going to be bliss, a final rest after that long, hard life, that reward we get, that's something that we deserve at the end of it all. And when you see it, advertised on television or whatever screen you're watching these days, there are typically, you see pictures of people playing golf or lounging around in resorts or heading off on cruise ships or taking those walks you see along those, exotic beaches with their white pants sort of rolled up just underneath, above their ankle. So their nice pants don't get wet. We see these sort of pictures. Retirement is painted and it's promoted as that special time in one's life that is finally set aside for you and for you alone. But it might surprise you that the whole concept of retirement, it's quite a modern idea, to be honest. The notion of retirement really only became a possibility and an option to the Western culture in the 1900s, just after the Industrial Revolution. Now, before the Industrial Revolution, job opportunities were, I guess you'd call them, more fluid. Now, what do I mean when I say they were more fluid? For example, like as a farmer would get older, what he would do, he would eventually get his sons to actually take over and start doing the harvesting and some of the harder work on the farm. And he would just start to perform some of the lighter duties around the place. Or if you talk about a businessman before the 1900s, before the Industrial Revolution, he might hire out the sort of more difficult and the more sort of energy sapping work to the young up and comers, you would call them. And what his role would be then, he would start to sort of mentor them and get alongside them, along that new and up and coming generation. But this whole obsession with productivity and economic growth, which was brought on by the Industrial Revolution, what that did was it basically got rid of all those sort of older possibilities. When you talk about the farmer or the businessman becoming a mentor. And with all the new machinery that was brought in to make jobs more efficient and productive, older employees were they started to get seen as more of a liability than an asset. As people, they found out or they saw that they were more likely to maybe make some mistakes, or sometimes people noticed that they would grow tired quicker. And basically, people started to actually point the finger and say they're slowing down the manufacturing. So what happened? Eventually, what happened was governments and even companies as well, they started to do this thing. The government started Social Security, and companies started this thing called pension. And they started these things with the hope that when workers arrived to that ripe old age of 60, that these workers who had put in the hard yards, that they could actually leave the workforce. And by leaving it, they could actually make room for the younger, the more energetic, and the more productive workers, who also had, they had young families to take care for as well. So what these, the Social Security and the pension idea did was it looked like it was giving a win-win situation for everyone. The young families who had their young household to look after, they had their work, and the elderly could actually enjoy that reward after their many hard years of work and service for the community and the workforce. But what about today? What is the general thought and conversation around retirement today? Well, as much as I would like to say that, those people who are aging closer to that time in their lives are relaxed and joyful about that idea of finally, hanging up the boots for good and heading off to enjoy those golden years of retirement, I'm afraid for many that's just simply not the case. The thought of retirement, and especially with this cloud of coronavirus looming over all of us, the thought of retirement is actually something that causes an immense amount of stress and anxiety and worry for a lot of people. Some of the questions that probably keep a lot of these people up at night as they start to think about retirement. Things like, am I earning enough money right now so I'm going to be able to be comfortable in retirement? Or what sort of budget am I going to plan for around my retirement? Where do I actually go and find a good and trustworthy financial advisor who can sort of steer me through that process? When should I retire? When am I even going to be ready? I don't know now. Maybe I'm 40 or 50. And some of them might be, some of their stresses might be, what am I going to do with all this time? Golf or cruise ship or bowls or holidays, grandkids are almost going to sleep and eat. What am I going to do with all these options? How long will my money last? And what happens if I get sick? The concerning list of questions that, as I said, sometimes even keep people up at night go on and on and on and on. Our culture today speaks loudly and often about the later years of life. And it's this thing we call retirement. But as I said at the beginning of our chat today, retirement is a relatively sort of new idea in the story of humanity. So there has not actually been a lot said about it before the 1900s. So in saying that, it's obvious that there has not been much said about it at all in the Bible as well. And that's where we're going right now, to the Bible. Now there is, however, a really interesting and I believe helpful passage found in the Old Testament, which comes probably as close as possible to speaking about retirement. And the passage, as I said, is found in the Old Testament, and it's found from a book called Numbers. It's one of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And this is what it says, and the passage I'm reading is from Numbers chapter 8, verses 23 to 26. This is what it says. The Lord said to Moses, "This applies to the Levites. Men 25 years old or more shall come to take part in the work at the tent of meeting. But at the age of 50, they must retire from their regular service and work no longer. They may assist their brothers in performing their duties at the tent of meeting, but they themselves must not do the work. This, then, is how you are to assign the responsibilities of the Levites." Now, it says straight away in this verse that these things apply to who? To the people identified as Levites, the Levites. Now, the Levites, they were people from one of the 12 tribes of Israel. But unlike the other tribes, the Levites never received any inheritance of land. Instead, they were sort of set apart as servants and ministers to the Jewish religious system. And more so than that, specifically to the tabernacle, this thing called the tabernacle. Now, the tabernacle was central to the Jewish faith, and it was basically this large tent that would be set up. This is good timing, playing. That was bound to happen. Anyway, the tabernacle, right? So it was this large tent that would actually be sent up in the center of the campsite of the Israelites. And the tabernacle, what it represented God's presence among his people. And the Levites were in charge of this. For the Levites, it wasn't just something they were responsible for. This was their vocation. This was their calling in life. They were dedicated to the tabernacle and to the religious life that surrounded it. And it tells us in this passage what the structure of the workers looked like too, who worked, the men who worked with the tabernacle. It tells us what this structure looked like. It tells us that firstly, men 25 years old or more shall come to take part in the work at the tent of meeting. But at the age of 50, they must retire from their regular service and work no longer. And then it continues. It continues talking about those men in their 50s or over, and it says this: "They may assist their brothers in performing their duties at the tent of meeting, but they themselves must not do the work." Now, something I found that was really interesting when I actually read this passage in some of the other translations out there. What I found really interesting was, instead of saying that they may assist their brothers in the other translations, instead of saying they may assist their brothers, it actually said that they could help or minister to their younger brothers. Not just assist, but it actually said that they may help and minister to them. And something else, keep that in your mind. And something else that I found that was when it actually says that men aged 50 and above should help the younger ones perform their duties. When you actually go to the Hebrew, which is the original language of the text, when you go to the Hebrew, it actually translates better to this. It says, the men aged from 50 and above should keep guard over. Or the men aged from 50 and above should watch over and preserve the younger workers and their work. Let's say that in one sort of whole sentence, what some of the Hebrew and what some of the other translations said. He said that the men aged 50 and above should minister to the younger ones. They should keep guard over them. They should watch over them. And they should do this to preserve them. And I think with these words floating around, we are beginning to see quite a different picture for those the individuals that are entering into retirement, maybe, or looking to go into retirement soon. Because it seems like in the ancient Israelite culture that retirees didn't simply wander around the beach holding hands or buy a little place on the Jordan River so that they could rest in their final days. Although I'm sure there was some of that, and that's good. That's a good thing that people were resting after that. But it doesn't seem like that was their priority. The role of the elderly didn't seem to actually finish. What it did do is it started to change shape. Now you can imagine after decades of lugging around wood and materials that belonged to the tabernacle, at the age of 50, the Levites were not called, as I said, to grab their fishing rod and stroll over to the Red Sea for years of fishing and leisure. They weren't called to do that. They were actually called to watch over and to keep guard over and to get alongside and to help and to cheer on their younger, maybe stronger but maybe more naive brothers. Their role had changed, but it certainly hadn't finished. And I might dare to be bold enough, and also I say this with humility because I know I am, far from being in that space of thinking about retirement myself, but I'll be bold enough to state that the reward of those who follow Jesus, the ultimate reward for us, is not a long rest on the beach. It's not retirement. The reward of a child of God is so much richer, so much fuller and beautiful than we could ever imagine in this life right now. I think just to stay with that thought for a moment, Paul captures this so well in one of the letters he writes to his spiritual son in Timothy. And he writes this, he says, "For my departure is near." This is Paul talking to his spiritual son Timothy. "For my departure is near. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race." And he says, "I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." When we think about retirement, there's lots of questions. But maybe we're asking the wrong questions. Instead of asking, will I have enough money? Maybe we could ask, what could I do and who could I bless with the money that I have? Or instead of asking, what am I going to do with all my free time? Maybe we could ask, God, what is it that you will have me do with the time that you have given me? Now I know this seems like a very big challenge to those who are actually entering into or soon to be entering in to this train of thought and this sort of phase of life. But I think there is also just as big of a challenge to those of us who are still in that caring of the tabernacle age bracket. Those of us in our 20s, 30s, 40s, and in our culture, 50s and 60s, right? Because, we don't retire, not many of us retire at 50 years anymore. It's sort of the 60 and above, 65 and above, I would say. And the challenge to us, and it's a challenge to those people in that bracket, is this. In biblical times, there was something that existed among the Israelites that would have made this whole transition for the elderly from going to, say, working with the tabernacle to a different role, to one of mentoring or whatever it was, to watching over, to keeping guard. But that transition, there was something in the culture of the Israelites that would have made that transition so much more easy. It would have been an honor and a celebration, this transition. And the thing that was in that Israelite culture was the profound respect and honor that the Israelites had for their elders. Those in their later and wiser years were held up and significantly honored in the Hebrew culture and all throughout the Bible. Over and over again in Scripture, we hear praise and respect laid upon the elderly of their community. In Leviticus, it says this, it says, stand up in the presence of the elderly and show respect for the aged. In Exodus, it says, honor your father and your mother. You go to the New Testament, in Timothy, it says, never speak harshly to an older man, but appeal to him respectfully, as you would to your own father. And again in Timothy, treat older women as you would your very own mother. And we go back to the Old Testament, in Proverbs, it says to us this, it says, a wise son hears his father's instruction, but a scoffer does not listen to rebuke. Here's a confronting question for us. Do we honor our elderly in our Australian culture like this today? And I think I can just throw it out there and say, no, I don't think we do. I don't think we do. But maybe if we did, maybe if we started to, in our Western culture, well, let's start here in our Australian culture, and to actually listen to our older brothers and sisters, or maybe we can call them our aunts and uncles. Maybe if we started to listen to them in this way, in the way where they were seen as the elders were in biblical times, where we started to seek them out, to respect them and to honor them, maybe then we will give them the strength and the desire and the confidence so that they don't fear retirement because of a lack of money or not knowing what to do, or the fear of the unknown and change. Maybe they won't fear it anymore, but maybe we could encourage them, like the elders of the Levites, to actually stand over us and keep guard and watch over us as they not go sit at the back, but as they partner with us and they encourage us and they guide us through the paths that they have already walked long before we did, or long before we even contemplated. We journey towards a kingdom which is for all cultures and all races, and of course, for all generations, the young and the elderly. And if we can embrace each other now, the good and the not so good that we all bring to the table, then right here and now, we could actually catch a glimpse and get a taste of the kingdom of God that is promised to all who call on the King of that kingdom, and that's King Jesus. I just want to say thanks for being with us today. I really hope what we've shared today has not only encouraged you, but also challenged you, because as nice as it sounds, there is so much more to life than retirement. Be blessed.